are commensurate with the amounts that have been spent in the last few years in terms of capital expenditure in the critical areas of education, health, transportation, food sustainability. I could go on and on and on. And you must admit that it's failure basically that you can score. So the reality is not that how now are we going to pay these debts that we should pay the debts by. We should ideally those debts that we incurred initially should have provided us with the basis to be able to liquidate these loans. Now it's as if it was an afterthought last year to suddenly introduce this 100 billion and sinking fund, which will take 60 years, which the governor of central bank himself indicated that we will be leaving debts for our children and grandchildren to pay. And he's absolutely right. But the point is, who created this debt or what caused this debt? And I explained to you, it is caused by government's reckless monetary policy framework that ensures that we as a people, as a country, will continue to get poorer whenever we earn increasing income. That is the framework that has driven us to this point of debt accumulation, that has driven us to this point of high rate of inflation, that has driven us to this point of high cost of borrowing, that has driven us to the point that the real sector has been basically paralyzed by the absence of cheap funds in order to be able to produce and expand. That is so. In other words, if you want to, first of all, two things: we must tighten our belts, not borrow to pay debts. Okay, but having said so, if we must move forward, we must stop the reckless system whereby an agency of government captures the dollar earnings and prints in as substitution naira allocations. So long as you continue to have that, central bank will continue to get richer and earn $40 billion out of the $50 billion that we have, because it can continue every time we earn dollars to say, these are my dollars, you guys play with naira. Now, I've added more dollars to my stock. I now have $50 billion worth of reserves. But in the process of accumulating those reserves, you are pushing in so much naira into the system and creating the adverse ripples that go with excess liquidity. High cost of borrowing, high cost of funds to government, high rate of inflation, high price of fuel, high level of subsidy, 2 trillion. I mean, let's look at this seriously. 2 trillion naira is over 1/3 of your projected expenditure for 2013. But nobody considers this as an issue. Whereas, just by doing the right thing, first of all, you would have a situation where you don't have to borrow as much as you did before. You don't also have to pay as high as an interest rate as before. Indeed, you don't have to borrow money you don't need, as we currently do, and incur a high debt ratio and this type of thing. You don't also have a situation where your own government agency is busy funding, for example, the bureau de change with the same dollars that you see people are carrying in suitcases and taking through the borders. Or those people who are looting the treasury, they go to the bureau de change, they buy their dollars, and who supplies the dollars to the bureau de change? The central bank does it openly without any stress. Okay? Those people who are also killing the Nigerian industrial sector, the smugglers or contraband and things like that, where do you think they get their dollars?
Well, speaking about the industrial sector, let's look at another angle to this. I mean, if the federal government says, yes, we're going to play less at the domestic debt market to give more room for the real sector, for corporates, isn't that something good? I mean, if the private sector if they can have more access to funds, we should see that.
I think you have missed something very critical here, okay? And that's the fact that your statement endorses a situation where we continue. Okay, you are expecting that.
It doesn't take away the fact that we are heavily in debt domestically, or that it's everything.
I hear you very well. You are assuming that the government will now say, okay, let's leave the domestic sector to the let's play less. Let's leave some so that the real sector can have some funds. Abi, isn't that what you're saying? Basically, yes, right? Okay, but that is not practical. Why is it not practical? Because it does not remove the problem of excess liquidity. Hello?
Okay, so if
it doesn't remove the problem of excess liquidity.
Okay.
And so long as you don't remove the problem of excess liquidity, you are going to continue to have high rates of interest.
You're saying that even when the private sector even when they get that opportunity, they will still have these funds high.
Because the problem, that's why I told you, I was analyzing for you,
Okay.
why cost of borrowing is high. So you cannot.
So it means it's not even a win-win situation.
Absolutely not. It's not. It's not a question of we leave the real domestic market for the real sector and we'll go and borrow. First of all, I'm surprised that you even accept that somebody should go borrow outside to cover your domestic debt. I mean, I'm concerned about that to start with. But having said so, I'm very much concerned that you don't also understand that the issue is excess liquidity.
No, I do understand that it's excess liquidity.
Right, because the excess liquidity is what instigates your high rates of interest. It's not the government going there to compete and things like that. It's neither here nor there.
Because it's not something that can be solved overnight. It's not something that can be solved in a quarter or 2 quarters.
It can be solved within a month, 6 months, because all you have to do is stop excess liquidity. The deluge or the burden of excess liquidity. And how do you do that? Very simple. Central bank, please stop creating excess liquidity in the system. How do you do that?
Stop converting those dollars.
Thank you. The 80% of the revenue that we earn, that you yourself...
You think it's feasible, it's workable?
Why is it not workable? You tell me why it's not workable. Because the moment you do that, what happens? There's no more excess liquidity. Excess liquidity dries up. And it dries up with the train of adverse effects. High cost of government borrowing, large amount of government borrowing, high interest rates for the real sector, high fuel prices, we're weakening Naira, rising unemployment. These are characteristics that have been with us for 30 years, and we keep doing the same thing and hoping we'll get a different result. You can't.
Now, incidentally, today, the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, they'll take their decision on the monetary policy rate. Let me just squeeze that in. I mean, 12%. Analysts have been talking. Let's at least get a signal. Let's see 25 basis points.
Do you think that the central bank does not know that its 12% MPR instigates high borrowing costs? Of course they know. I mean, you don't have to go to school to know that. Okay? The question is, why can they not? Because it's not imposed from outside. So why can they not bring it down? They can't bring it down because they are fighting with excess liquidity. For example, in April, only last week, 720 billion was put in the hands of the banks. In addition, on your screen yesterday, the central bank is also having 275 billion of treasury bills to mature. All these are funds going to the market. And then what do you think? Excess liquidity is exacerbated. And what would happen? You cannot say you are bringing down interest rates when you have this huge amount of excess liquidity. You have to control it. You might even say 12% MPR is not enough. It's crazy.
So for you, I'm just looking. Obviously, there's no silver bullet, but you stick with your, what you say.
Not that I stick. It makes sense. Tell me something else that makes more sense. On how you can bring down interest rates, on how you can increase a real sector participation in government, on how you can bring down the cost of funds to government, on how you can stop government from borrowing money it doesn't need at 12%, on how you can remove fuel subsidy totally without anybody grumbling because the price will be below 97 naira per liter. Tell me any other way that you can bring that about. Tell me any other way that you can bring the real sector into focus. You won't find any. At least I'll give you anything.
I know. But in all of this, what worries you the most? Is it the fact that we might be, as you say, getting into another debt trap? Or the fact that policymakers haven't been able to come up with a way to properly manage it, as it were? Apart from that, that one solution that you say is very viable right now on the table.
If there was hope that there is on the horizon a strategy that will stop government borrowing, not borrowing from here to cover here and things like that, okay, I would buy it. But you can't tell me such a strategy at the moment because it cannot exist side by side with excess liquidity. It's as simple as that. You can't run away from that. No matter how... look, forget about all the fine words they tell you and things like that. This is real. This is live.
Real economics. Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing your thoughts, giving us your own perspective, and hopefully we'll hear more good news on the debt front as we continue to borrow. Well, of course, we agree that we must borrow, but then, of course, that's another very tricky topic. Well, I've been talking to Henry Boyo. He's an economist, and we'll be looking at Nigeria's debt profile. Of course, plans by the federal government to borrow more loans this year, this time from external sources, not within the country. Still battling with this domestic debt servicing, 6 trillion at the moment. Well, there's a sinking from 100 billion to retire those domestic debt. But it's still an ongoing conversation. We'll still be keeping our eyes on policymakers. Don't forget also, before we go, that today the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank will take their decision on the MPR, that's the monetary policy rate, the rate at which